Alright, welcome back to my channel. And one of the things I want to be able to do sometimes is to talk about the public school systems and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And recently I read an article about a teacher that was fired for refusing to use a student's preferred pronouns. Now the teacher did say they would use the student's new chosen name, but they felt it was a violation of their faith to use that once a female student and now identified as a male did not want to use the words he or him. And let's just kind of put what maybe your beliefs are to the side of that and what my beliefs are on to the side of that. And one thing that really stuck out was the principal who said that this is one of the worst things that they could imagine happening to a student. I might be getting that quote just slightly off, but they did say one of the worst things. And that sentence right there out of the whole article made me more upset and blew my mind, because that tells you how far we have strayed in thinking that how more messed up our schools are. I can think of probably 100 different ways, worst ways, that schools treat students. And I don't mean this to be against teachers, because I have a heart for teachers and people that want to do the right thing because they love kids, they love teaching, and they are trying to do the best that they can. I know, because I worked with so many of them and I have so many in my family. But let's talk about what are some of the worst possible ways that a student could be treated in the school system. Can we talk about bullying? How much bullying goes on? Bullying goes on, yes, even as we're adults in the workplace. I've been bullied. My sister was bullied. My brother was bullied. I don't know, my husband, maybe he was bullied as well. I was bullied on multiple occasions, and luckily I did have teachers and principals that were able to come quickly, and they took care of the situation. I can't say the same for some other people that I know, but I noticed that I witnessed so much bullying. I had students that bullied. I had students that were being bullied. Sometimes nothing was done about it. Sometimes things were done about it. And sometimes there was nothing that could be done because of laws and rules put in place that are supposed to protect children. Many times, I felt so many times, hands were tied. And it was so frustrating. Very frustrating. But kids bully each other. They're sometimes so hateful and ugly. And I don't know why they act that way. I think a lot of times had to do is you would meet the parents and you could understand why. Maybe it was that way. Not all of them. Some of them had sweet, wonderful parents. And for whatever reason, their kid was a bully. But they're bullied constantly. They're beat, they're beat, they're harassed. They're driven to feeling that suicide is the only way to go. That's some reason so many people decide to pull their kids out of the public school systems and homeschool them, because they're being bullied. I'm sorry, that's a pretty terrible thing that happens to kids. Let's talk about the sexual abuse and harassment and things that go on in those public schools. And I don't mean just teachers having affairs with students, because at some point the student is still a little bit complicit in that behavior for whatever reason. I mean, it's different if they were sometimes brainwashed or duped into it, but I think a lot of times kids can be just as sexually deviant as adults can. That does not excuse the adult for their behavior, because they are the adult in that situation and they are the professional, and it is totally unacceptable. Okay, but there is also times where there is kid-on-kid sexual harassment and abuse. And there are things you don't really hear about very often, but I have heard stories from my family and friends, and even things that I had witnessed in my 10 years that blew my mind. Things that kids knew, things that kids were doing to each other, and sometimes the victim was just clueless. They didn't know. But it was disturbing, and I do know people that had to call CPS because it was just mind-blowing. And these kids, that are probably growing up in these dysfunctional homes, being exposed to pornography and violent movies, and they're coming home and they're influencing your children and telling them things you don't want to know. Kids are able to get access to the internet and pull up things that would blow your mind, whether it's on purpose or an accident. I know in school I accidentally my friend and I were doing a research paper, and we were looking for a picture of a beaver. I had no idea beaver was slang for anything else. And so when I pulled up a pornographic picture with my friend, we were just like, close that lid, freaked out, because we were worried somehow it was going to be tracked back to us. You know, that was just an accident, and luckily we weren't the kind of, we knew that was wrong. But I have seen kids pull up things intentionally, and they show their peers that, and sometimes parents are contacted, sometimes they're not. Okay, let's talk about violence and those school shootings of children that are getting shot in schools. Schools should be safe for kids, and I think sometimes a lot of times schools are safer, especially for their home. But we have children that are just being shot and killed by their peers. And, you know, sometimes you get the statistics and going, maybe it's happening more, and maybe it is. But definitely in the past few decades. And we know kids shouldn't face that way, and I don't think banning and restricting gun use is really the answer to that. Some people might disagree, but that's another reason. Do you want to keep your kids safe, and are kids really safe there? I don't know. I used to think that having more police presence was the solution to a lot of the violence and things that go on in schools. And I've changed my mind on that a lot, because I think I've been more aware of the approaching state and police brutality that goes on. Not to say that all cops are bad people, because I don't believe that, but I do think a lot of cops are believed that because they have this badge, they have this special authority, and that they should enforce laws. And I don't believe you should enforce laws that are immoral or laws that don't hurt other people. I read about in a school where a kid was basically handcuffed and arrested for supposedly stealing milk from the cafeteria. The kid apparently forgot to get it the first time he went around. I think this was a high school student, and the cop saw it, and the kid was probably rude and disrespectful. Okay, whatever. But it was the cop coming in and making a big deal about it, and it was going to court. That should have been a principal handling that situation, and the cop should not be involved in something like that. The cop should only be involved when it is a student that is violent. Okay, and there are a lot of violent kids in school. Way more. I hardly ever saw. In fact, I never in school ever saw a kid violently act towards teachers. Now, I did grow up in a suburban area, so that wasn't really a thing until I started. And when I started teaching, yes, I had students that were violent towards me. Some of it was related because of their disability, their mental impairments. That was kind of the only way they responded. And then I had some kids, I don't know why they did that, other than it's probably just the only way they knew how, because that's what they grew up around. I think in a certain extent we want cops in schools because we think it adds an extra presence to protecting our students. But as we saw, and we believe in possibly, I think it was the Parkland shooting, that there was a cop who didn't go in, and that should have. He had a duty to protect those kids, and he didn't even go in and try. I understand being terrified, but you put on that badge, you put that gun, you're there for a reason. Just as a teacher would probably sacrifice her life for her kids, because that's just what you do. And that's something as a teacher with the Sandy Hook thing. That was my first year having my own classroom, and I was just thinking, man, what would I do? Whether you think a teacher having a kid still carry in the classroom, whatever, that's not my point of this video right now. And then I think one of the fourth ways, the worst things that can happen to kids is, this kind of relates to the bullying issue, but the way they are belittled and shamed by not just their peers, but by teachers as well. And I am probably, unfortunately, guilty of probably shaming and belittling kids. And I think I was just doing it because that's how everyone else did it. That's what I saw my teachers do, and I don't think it was okay. I just kind of didn't know any better, and I think sometimes teachers don't know better. And there are teachers that do know better. I saw a lot of instances in over 10 years of teachers just going at kids. I had students with behavioral disorders, and while sometimes it was somewhat understandable their disability, I think there was more to it. Sometimes it was just a parenting issue as well. But I did have a teacher that I felt like they constantly picked on my kid all the time, and I was so new at it, and this was a veteran teacher, I kind of didn't know what to say or do. I kind of just let it. I tried to prevent the situations the best I could, but sometimes I didn't know any better. And I think I was just also kind of afraid. But I did witness so many times teachers just going off on a student over something kind of petty and small, and you're like, why aren't we pulling these children to the side, telling them what they did was wrong, instead of yelling it in front of the whole class? Because, I mean, at one point I probably thought that was probably a great idea, that, oh yeah, if we just shame these kids in front of their peers, they'll stop doing it. It doesn't really stop the behavior so much, and I think it does worse to their feelings and self-esteem, probably, than addressing the behavior privately. And I don't mean just like telling a kid that's across the room, hey, you need to be quiet. I told you to be quiet. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I would see teachers that would say things to students that should have been addressed in private. There was nothing wrong with addressing the behavior, but the way it was addressed. And I was thinking, man, I would not want my child in that classroom. Not that because I'd be worried my child would be the one getting yelled at, but because that's what they would be hearing all the time. I would not want my child. That teacher might have been great at teaching reading and math, but I would not want my child to hear constant yelling and hearing that that's what they're going to need to think about their peers. Because the way we as teachers would say things about other kids or constantly get on, those kids are going to go home and tell their parents, oh, this kid is such a da-da-da-da. And kids start to form these images of what they expect their peers to be. And I think the final thing I wanted to say was one of the worst things that could happen to kids in public schools is standardized testing. It is so bad. Teachers know it's bad. Principals know it's bad. Superintendents probably know it's bad too. They feel like there's nothing they can do about it because you have unelected bureaucrats making all these rules up and creating all this messed up stuff. But your child is often being treated, they're just a number to the district and to the state. I'm not saying that's the way your teacher and the principal feel about it, because they don't like it. They don't want to see your kid as just a number and like, okay, they're continuously scoring 20 points lower than all their peers. What am I going to do so they can score higher on the next test? And we just pound into them all these interventions. And you know what most of the time these interventions are? A lot of times, especially as the kids are getting older, is just, okay, well, let's just give them more test type questions. And really it's just nothing but teaching them to the test. Okay? We are not educating children to the best of our ability. We are just shoving useless, not all of it's useless, but we're shoving so much information in them so they can pass a freaking test. Okay? And when I say teachers don't like it, they don't like it, and they know this. But their hands are tied. Okay? But your kids in the public school systems are being taught to take a test. They're doing nothing but every time teachers are having their weekly meetings, sometimes they're called professional learning communities. They have different names. It's all about usually going over the data and what can we do to improve these scores, to somehow help the kids. And I understand that we want interventions. We want to give these kids more tutoring to help them to read better, to solve math problems better. That is good. That's a good motivation and a good thing to have because we want all of our children to be successful. But the way it's done is not helpful, especially when the tests are so poorly written. So yes, to this principal that thought the worst thing that could happen to a student is for a teacher to abstain from saying 2 words, they need to really, really think about all the things that they are part of and culpable of in educating millions of children.